Good morning, everyone. My name is Martine Jago. I'd like to welcome you to the first 6 workshops. I'll hand over directly to my colleague, Dr. Jan Fish, for our land acknowledgement reflection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martine. I am truly pleased and honored to introduce Dr. Sandy Kewanaptea as a member of the Hopi Nation and as faculty member in Ethnic and Women's Studies Department at Cal Poly Pomona. Please mute, thank you. Newly appointed tribal liaison at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jan. No, Sandy Konaptawa Dixon, no Hopitu, no more copy, no Dawa, Wawa, no So'o. Thank you. My name is Sandy Konaptawa Dixon. As she said, I'm from the Hopi Nation. I'm from the village of Mokope, and I am San Clan. I'm also a So'o, which is most important is the role of a grandmother. Thank you so much for the invitation of joining your organization today. I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgement and in reference to a California land acknowledgement that we also use at Cal Poly Pomona. We recognize that we gather on the territorial and ancestral lands of Native California Indians. Cal Poly Pomona and other places acknowledge the Gabalingo Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, the Los Angeles Basin, and South Channel Islands. We also acknowledge that this land remains shared space among the Kizh, the Serrano, Cahuilla, Rumsen Ohlone, and Liseño people. We acknowledge the spiritual connection and rights as the original stewards and traditional caretakers of this land. We thank them for their strength, perseverance, and resistance. We recognize that every member of this community has and continues to benefit from the use and the occupation of this land ever since it was taken by the land-grabbing settlers to form the cities we now live and work in. Consistent with our values of reparations, community, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible our relationship as settlers in relationship to California Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold ourselves and the organizations we work on behalf of more attuned to the needs of American Indian, Native American peoples where we live, work, and organize. Escalate, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Sandy, for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone. We're so glad you're here. Please put your name and your affiliation, any role, in the chat. You will see a link. The very first link in the chat is a prompt for us to see what your needs might be and what your knowledge, expertise might be, so that will help us work with you and support you in your work. Over the next several months, we will have the opportunity to learn and share together through a series of 6 2-hour workshops like today on language acquisition and literacy development in young dual language and multi-language learners 0 to 8 years of age. So those 6 workshop titles are today's Cultural Construction of Languages, to be followed by Language Acquisition and Development in November. Then we have a break in December. And in January, we resume with Culturally Responsive Practices to Support Language Development and Literacy. In February, Facilitating Language and Literacy in Linguistically Diverse Communities. In March, Reflection and Exploration of Responsive Curriculum. And finally, in April, Culturally Responsive Observation and Assessment. So why Peach and why Dr. Seuss? PEACH stands for Partnerships for Education, Articulation and Coordination through Higher Education. It also has that A for advocacy. We are a very big group for advocacy in early childhood education. We are a cross-sector, cross-segmental higher education systems initiative. The PEACH Collaborative includes cross-sector, so 2-year, 4-year and graduate level early childhood child development program faculty partners, as well as representatives from allied professional development programs, professional organizations and advocacy organizations interested in collaborating to accomplish PEACH goals. The mission of PEACH is to strengthen and support academic professional development pathways and related educational programs for the early childhood workforce throughout California to support children's learning, growth, and family engagement. We commit to actively work for equitable and anti-racist structures in higher education and to support the early childhood workforce, children, and families. And we encourage anyone today who is interested in the work that we do to contact us to have more information. I want everyone to know that I typically do not read PowerPoint slides to my students, but I would like to spend a moment for everyone to read and reflect on the current slide. You'll have 1 minute. Thank you. This quotation has been carefully selected, and I'm sure you can see why. So as a representative of PEACH today, I'd like to read our statement in response to this statement on your screen. Dr. Seuss books such as Green Eggs and Ham and The Cat in the Hat resonate for children and adults more than 30 years after the author's death in 1991. Theodore Seuss Geisel was born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts. His books have been translated into many languages, including Braille, and are sold in over 100 countries. Dr. Seuss Enterprises have decided that 6 Dr. Seuss books are no longer to be published due to racist images and culturally insensitive content. Further, Dr. Seuss Enterprises has reported that an inclusive group of new authors and artists representing a diverse cross-section of the population will create a new series of children's books that include original stories inspired by original Dr. Seuss sketches from archives held here at the University of California, San Diego. In this way, Geisel's legacy of motivating young readers, writers, and artists can continue with illustrated tales firmly focused in anti-bias and anti-racism going forward. And we appreciate very much the funds of the Dr. Seuss Foundation and all of the PEACH colleagues who came together in collaboration, which is our way, to present these 6 workshops. We're so glad you're here. I'll hand now to Drs. Fish and Sharon Donovan, Jan Fish and Sharon, who will be working with you for the rest of the morning. Thank you so much. I'll mute.
Good morning. I'm Sharon Donovan, City College of San Francisco, and I've been an active member of PEACH since the expansion to Northern California. I've had a lifelong interest in bilingual education and acquisition. And at City College, I wrote and taught a course called Dual Language Learning in Early Childhood Programs. And I've had a strong emphasis on these themes as I continue to teach child growth and development. I work with lots of ESL students. I'm sure most of you do as well. And I seek their perspective on acquisition and bilingual learning. I also bring a parent perspective. My younger son went to a very successful dual language Spanish immersion program from kinder through middle school. And that kind of rounds out the way I look at these topics. And I'm very glad to be here. Thank you. Jan?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jan Fish, and Professor Emerita and current professor at California State University, Northridge, where I coordinated the baccalaureate program at first in child development, and then coordinated the ECE master's program, where I currently still teach. I am Peach co-lead since 2011, since the inception of Peach, and happily, I was introduced to Spanish as a second language by my older sister and followed in her footsteps, studying from age 12 through majoring in college in Spanish language, and had the incredible honor of going to South America and studying bilingual programs in Montevideo, Uruguay, where like the Lower East Side of New York, waves of immigration had come from Europe from the 1880s on. And I had the joy also of studying in Barcelona the Catalan language history before and after the Franco dictatorship, during which people who spoke a language other than Spanish were admonished by telling them to not speak like a dog. I watched at the same time as a parent, my preschool age child learn Catalan in Barcelona, and later on attend a school in Madrid for second grade and be immersed, the only English speaker in a Spanish-speaking class, and watch her silently listen, and then in the middle of the year explode with Spanish language. As a state preschool teacher in the Lower Mission District of San Francisco, I watched a 3-year-old break the English semantic codes, speaking Spanish and learning English. I watched a 4-year-old whose mother was from France and spoke French, whose father spoke Portuguese, and she was growing up in a Spanish-speaking, predominantly neighborhood, also navigate English and social relationships in Spanish and the program in English. And I've also learned from a family center leader from Mexico in the San Fernando Valley at a public elementary school about the importance of connecting with families and finding multiple strategies so that we can identify, honor, and integrate the unique and cultural and linguistic assets of all children in our classrooms. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. Sharon?
Mm-hmm. Good morning. So we're going to start here with a very brief look at the inspiring work of Te Whariki, which is New Zealand's approach to bilingual education, and shows what can happen when a nation determines to stand behind the values of dual language, cultural, and linguistic learning. So this was formalized in 1996 and updated in 2017. And I had an opportunity to go to New Zealand with Margie Carter and Elias, and I see some other folks from that Harvest Resource Tour. We went and visited early care and education programs in New Zealand and learned about this incredible venture. So Te Whariki is based on the aspirations for children in New Zealand, which are to grow up as competent and confident learners and communicators, to be healthy in mind, body, and spirit, to be secure in their sense of belonging, in the knowledge that they make a valued contribution to society. In the next slide. This woven mat is a central metaphor for the interconnectedness among various values and strands in New Zealand, and serves as sort of an emblem for the program, and it informs all aspects of the curriculum. In the next slide. I won't attempt Maori pronunciation here, but I'll read this off in English. The four principles that go in one direction are empowerment. The early childhood curriculum empowers the child to learn and grow. Holistic development. The early childhood curriculum reflects the holistic way that children learn and grow. Family and community. The wider world of family and community is an integral part of the early childhood curriculum. And relationships. Children learn through responsive and reciprocal relationships with people, places, and things. And then this is integrated with the strands going in the other direction and woven together. Well-being, the health and well-being of the child is protected and nurtured. Belonging, children and their families feel a sense of belonging. Contribution, just opportunities for learning are equitable and each child's contribution is valued. Communication, the language and symbols of their own and other cultures are promoted and protected. And exploration, the child learns through active exploration of the environment. Next slide. Paying attention to the knots. When there was a great deal of interest in Reggio Emilia at the beginning of the development of this system and this approach. And there was also a concern that an excellent curriculum and approach that was developed in a small area in Italy not just be plunked into New Zealand and taken as a whole. So Robertson, one of the developers, suggested the cultural knots become apparent when observing another's culture's interpretations of education serve as a doorway into reconceptualizing our own ideas of education. These knots are the untidy complexities that emerge when different cultural contexts intermingle. Can we gaze upon Reggio Emilia's educational experience a cultural knot rather than a mere replica? This really resonated with Jan and me, and we thought this was a good place to start. Go to the next slide, please. This next article that we're going to look at is a history and analysis of bilingual education in the United States by Carlos Ovando from Arizona State University. The next slide. Ovando holds that bilingual education in the United States has been contested and reformulated with varying political, historical, social, and economic contexts. The article examines the various interpretations of the historical forces that have determined language policy in the United States and discusses permissive, restrictive, opportunist, and dismissive periods, the discrete periods that swing back and forth from acceptance and repression. The author argues that changing forces rather than any consistent ideology have shaped the nation's responses to language diversity, and concludes that language ideology in the United States has shifted according to historical events. Language policy in the US has experienced periods of expansiveness and restriction over the nation's history to best suit the powers over time. The powers that be, over time. And the next one. The research questions that drove this investigation is there an explicit quote, tradition of any kind regarding language diversity in the United States? What have been the key factors in determining policies for educating language minorities and how they varied during different historical periods? And what strategies have been used and how have opponents responded to establish effective educational programs for language minority children? We examine these themes because policy and politics, rather than pedagogy, have formed practice and understanding of how children best construct languages, and that will be shown in these policies and how they changed according to the socio-political context. In the next slide. Before introducing the permissive period, Ovando talks about the consideration that before colonial times, there was a cornucopia of indigenous language and cultures, estimated between 250 and 1,000 languages across the United States among Native peoples. And I'm particularly appreciative of Dr. Sandy's acknowledgement this morning, given this context. Ovando's acknowledgement, however, does not give a nod to the multiple languages that African enslaved peoples brought to these shores. So you won't see this in his history here. He starts off with a permissive period. Back to that, thank you. The permissive period is what he describes as between 1770s and the 1880s. And during the colonial period, immigrants from Europe initially adopted a permissive, expansive attitude to acknowledging and accepting European languages spoken and written, and not to the languages they found here. Many European immigrants lived in ethnic enclaves by choice, where home languages were used for religious services, community newspapers in multiple languages, private and public schools, and that identity was strongly linked to ancestral languages was well understood. Many states passed laws authorizing bilingual education, which occurred in German, Dutch, Polish, Italian, French, and Spanish. And needless to say, this did not, as I said before, does not include the languages of native or enslaved peoples. In the next slide. This is the dame school. It's probably in an ethnic enclave where children learned basic reading and, quote, ciphering necessary for farm work in the home of a woman in the community. And these were conducted in the languages of those enclaves. Next slide. From this period, we move to the permissive. To the restrictive. Starting in the 1880s, there was repressive Indian language policy as part of the genocidal campaign to, quote, civilize and contain them on reservations. And there was also some unsuccessful resistance by mother tongue advocates among the missionaries. There was anti-German sentiment, which is based largely on anti-Catholic agitation. And from 1889, English-only laws were passed by the American Protective Association, or put forward by the American Protective Association and passed. 1906, the Naturalization Act required an ability to speak English. And next slide. During the first half of the 20th century, the declaration of war on Germany intensified the push for monolingualism. There was increasing push for homogeneity, for national unity, and an ethnocentric, quote, Americanization classes were for immigrants. Predominance of the, quote, sink or swim or, quote, submersion approach and blaming language minority students for their academic failure was influenced by social Darwinism. A Supreme Court Meyer versus Nebraska decision upheld immigrants groups' right to cultivate their language as subject matter in private schools. And then next. This is my grandmother's kindergarten class in 1900. It's English only. Most of these children would have come from Ireland and most likely spoke English at home, although they were first generation
我的
immigrants.
小孩好有钱呀！1920年，他妈的，他们就穿这么
Can everybody hear that?
Yes.
Okay. There goes my grandmother. Good. To the next slide, please. Thank you. In reaction to the restrictive period, we see what Ovando calls the opportunist period of the 1960s and 1980s. This first one, I think, is a surprise to many. The National Defense Education Act was a response to the Soviet Union's success with Sputnik, calling for and funding an increase in foreign language, mathematics, and science education, although monolingual education was still the norm for immigrant children. In 1963, there was establishment of a very successful two-way bilingual program in Dade County, Florida, by Cubans who had fled the revolution and expected to return. And it and they emphasized language and cultural retention while learning skills for success in the United States. In 1968, the Bilingual Education Act was part of Johnson's War on Poverty and funded educational support and encouragement of parental involvement. But it's important to remember that this was put forth in very ambiguous terms. We'll go to the next slide. And the next slide, please. These images represent a widespread fear that the United States was lagging in the race to outer space due to shortcomings in the educational system. And the Life magazine on the left headline reads, "Crisis in Education, exclusive picture of a Russian schoolboy and his counterpart." And then the front page of the paper expressing more of that fear here. And the next, the opportunist period continued, and Lau versus Nichols decided in favor of a class action suit, claiming that Chinese children's civil rights were being violated because their success was impeded by not understanding their teachers, and that violated their right to equal opportunity under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The Equal Education Opportunities Act mandated identifying language minority students and implementing bilingual education in any school with at least 20 ELLs, speaking the same language. In 1981, Castaneda versus Pickard added specificity and oversight to Lau versus Nichols and informs much of contemporary policy based on research and best practice. And this is extremely important to as we think about the vague terms in which these policies and laws were put forward and how long it took for there to be any specificity and before there was any teeth in it. The next. This is what Ovando calls a dismissive period to the present. And we have a quote here from then President Ronald Reagan. "It's absolutely wrong and against American concepts to have a bilingual education program that is now openly, admittedly dedicated to preserving their native language and never getting them adequate in English so they can go out into the marketplace and participate." This atmosphere of fear was promoted when the president stated the preservation of home languages and culture supplants acquisition of English and the ability to assimilate as productive members of society. And the next. This is the end of Ovando's timeline, and Jen will be taking us to the present. But here are two items that came up in the 1980s. The first being the anti-bilingual education groups as English only backed California Proposition 187, restricting social and education services to undocumented immigrants, and Prop 27, the UNS initiative, which made English the primary language of instruction for language minorities. Ovando sees the voter approval of these two bills as instruments of the politics of resentment toward massive immigration from developing countries. Despite, next slide. Despite these setbacks, we progress. In our next workshop, we'll talk about challenges to the themes and laws of the dismissive period and research on how language is acquired and how practice can be informed by solid pedagogy. And Jan will take it from here. Thank you very much.
You know, I'd like to make a decision. I think we have enough time to take a few minutes before we start this part to, our participants have asked for some time to complete those prompts. So may we take 3 minutes?
Mm-hmm. Good idea.
Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
To please complete the pre-prompts for this workshop. We totally understand the need for this. So let's take 3 minutes. We'll stay with you.
The links are in the chat.
Thank you, Nancy.
Is this the survey you guys sent on our email?
No, this is this one's just a couple questions just for this workshop.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Perhaps one more minute? Oh. I think that's more than 3 minutes. I think we're okay to start back again. Thank you. Thank you, Barb. Well, as we have seen, many languages were spoken here before the explorers, quote unquote, settlers, quote unquote, land grabbers, quote unquote, arrived. We acknowledge that we are on the lands of the first residents, and we acknowledge the multitude of indigenous languages of the first residents and the multitude of indigenous languages of those brought here enslaved. Reflecting on history and acknowledging these strengths is critically important to our going forward and pulling that awareness with us. Next slide, please. Languages that predated exploration persist, as Dr. Sandy has communicated with us, as well as Sharon has updated us with. Many more languages have landed here since the first explorers encountered the first residents here from across the globe. And whether it's a language, a culture, a race, ethnicity, I may be able to communicate well with Spanish-speaking children because of my Spanish background and with their families, but I may be clueless about the cultural, rich linguistic, socio-political, and economic histories, experience of them, and totally ignorant of those children in my class, linguistic and cultural assets with languages that I am unaware of, or histories internationally that I am unaware of. So in that, we also acknowledge that US bilingual and language policy reflects shifting trends, but that prioritize languages of Western Europe when prioritizing bilingual ed. This policy history reflects that power struggle of English and the other. Next slide, please. While we may not always be aware, our composite history includes these unintentional and intentional extinctions and the persistence of human communities' linguistic and cultural strengths. And the plus in all of this, and all of this that we talk about today and in the series, are the ahas that we can have with each other and the discoveries that we make learning about the strengths that were previously unseen by us, unacknowledged, unappreciated, and unintegrated into the learning in our classrooms. Only our study, questioning, and awareness can heighten our ability to learn from each other and work together in this multilingual world. Next slide, please. Now you get a chance to talk to each other. We're very, very glad. We know that in this room, we have many strengths, and we would like to give you an opportunity to talk about your interests, contributions, and goals. What sparked your interest to come to this workshop? What do you bring to contribute to this dialogue? And what do you want to learn? So we have organized, Barbara has organized breakout rooms that you're randomly assigned to. And in each room, could you please choose a recorder? And recorder, could you look at the Google Doc and look at the number of your breakout room so that you can document the dialogue in your group? Are there
And
any?
I will put that link in the chat in a minute, as soon as you go to your breakouts.
Super. Thank you very much. Are there any questions about this? We have planned 10 minutes for this breakout, and please take the chance to get to know each other and also to give us what you bring and what you want to learn. Thank you. Please go to your breakout groups.
I don't know why it's not. Well, Nancy, you may need to pull up the PowerPoint because it is not opening for me.
Okay, I will get it in
Like
PowerPoint.
it will not open. Like it's showing it on my computer and it won't let me click on it.
There is an issue with this PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys are going to have to direct me on when to change slides, okay?
Sure,
And
I
we're
will
on-
do that.
And we're on slide 32.
Welcome back.
Yeah, there.
Welcome back. We're really glad that you have had some time finally to share with each other. And also, if you have just joined our workshop, could you please do two things for us? Please introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your affiliation, and your role. And also, could you then, Martine is going to put in the pre-evaluation prompts for this workshop for you to take a few minutes and complete and submit. Thank you very much for that. So let's hear from some of the group's conversations. Again, your questions for those of you just joining, or what sparked your interest in coming to this workshop? What do you bring to contribute to the dialogue? And what do you want to learn in this workshop and hopefully in this series of workshops that we'll see across this year? Which recorder would like to be the first?
Kathy has her hand up.
Kathy, I see your hand.
Okay, I'm so excited to be here. I just am so happy. Thank you for creating this workshop. And I was in a group with at first 3 remarkable human beings that live in California. And then another person joined right at the end. So we didn't really get to hear a lot from her. But we had Carol from Fresno, Yesenia from Cal State Long Beach, and Young Shea from Cal State Northridge, and myself, I'm from Laco. So all of us had very different experiences. Carol learned Spanish in junior high school, beginning of middle school through high school, college. She could speak, but she's like me. She doesn't know what she doesn't know, and she's so happy. She's similar to how I am, which is a monolingual person. I learned German, so I've had no practice with German since middle school and high school. So bad move on my part. I wish I could learn Spanish, but language is difficult for me. Yesenia is a lecturer at Cal State Northridge. She was a preschool teacher. She is a mom. She speaks only Spanish at home with her child, and she wants to incorporate new strategies into her language strategies into her lectures at in the college, so all feel welcome. And then Young, I know I'm saying your name wrong, but I'm doing my
Yang Xiong. Don't
Thank
worry,
you.
Yang Xiong.
She loves where her children are going to school. The environment of where her 2 young children went to school was very welcoming. They asked, her children are bilingual. They're learning to speak. They know Mandarin Chinese at home, and the students at her children's schools are learning Mandarin Chinese as well. They were welcoming, and her children are learning English as well. So it's a very exciting, powerful group. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Can I share one thing? We all agreed that we want our students to hold on to their home language, and that the parents need to understand that that's their job to keep that home language going and not to subdue it for English. So we all had experiences in that. So something we need to remember.
That's wonderful, Kathy and Carol and Yangsheng. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten everybody's name from your group, but I won't be able to do that. But I want to say that we all don't know what we don't know. And we all have to assume a humility in that to learn, and a curiosity to learn, because there are universes out there to know and to integrate. Cindy.
So we didn't have a recorder in our room, Jan. Oh, sorry, I'll put myself on video. But there were 4 of us, myself included, one from American River College, Cal State Long Beach, and East LA. Yeah. So, and I can't remember, I'm sorry, it was Elvia, Robin, and her last name was Picker. I can't, so sorry, because I wasn't really paying attention, but when Carol said what she said, I just had to add something, that it's our job, like, yes, it's the parents' job, but it's our job as a society to help parents to see that that multi-language learning is important. Because I think, like, my experience has been when I was a preschool teacher, that many multilingual parents were concerned that that it was a disadvantage to their children. And so that's part of our messaging that has to get out to the world, you know, like multi-language is, and actually in America, because we're actually the only country that is really ethnocentric around language. And that much I know, because I've traveled, and I know, Jan, you have too. And many countries, there's multi-language. Like if you go to Europe, they know 5, 6, 7 languages because they're, you know, surrounding countries. So I think that it's a deeper systemic problem with this idea of multi-language learning, but I'm grateful that we're starting here and that we have an opportunity to hopefully make a change for future generations.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I think also I would add that knowing that we're in partnership with the families helps us make sure that we acknowledge and identify those contributions that the individual children's languages and cultures bring to the early childhood classroom. And for us in either professional development or higher education to work with our adult ECE practitioners to bring their languages into the classroom too. Next.
And if I may, Jen, I think
Sure.
I just would like to make the point that for our purposes here, our charge is to instill those dispositions in our students. So we're I think most of us in this room are one step away from the parents, and so we need to give our students the skills to instill those dispositions. And I'll back on.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Wonderful. May we hear from another group?
I'll speak for our group. This is LaShawn. So we had a mixture. We had LA Trade Tech, Southwest College, East LA, Merritt, and Norco colleges represented. Most of us are teaching literacy, literature, special education courses. A few of us mentioned that we haven't really taught the anti-bias or diversity classes in a while. However, thinking about ways to embed this type of information throughout the child development courses so that it's always a part of students' experiences in their education pathway. So with that, we come to want to learn more about the history. So that was something that caught people's attention to these particular workshops. Want to learn more about mentoring and teaching adults and mentoring and teaching young children, especially as it relates to the diversity of culture and language. Learning about the language laws. I think I mentioned that. Excited about learning more about the structure of language. One person, I think it was Cecilia, who mentioned that she already engaged students with culture and language related conversations, and just having those conversations, she realizes how much students are engaged, even online. So talking about their families and their culture and things like that is a way of really getting the students to engage more. Maria Adams shared that although the students she worked with are predominantly Spanish speaking, she has seen an increase of students, Middle Eastern students. So just being able to learn more of how to better connect and engage with students from diverse backgrounds is something she's looking for. And Maria Rivas shared that the family has she has a grandniece, and the family wants to raise her niece bilingual. And so we also shared how that's a conversation that has been coming up with my students. Some have the regret of not raising their children with multiple languages and placing value on their native language, or the belief that the children could only be successful if they only learn English and spoke English. So, and I think that was it, unless anyone from my group wants to add anything.
Oh, that's wonderful, LaShawn. A really robust conversation and a lot of contributions and a lot of tip-offs of the importance of history and mentoring and teaching strategies and the structure of language. Yes, Patricia, I see your
Yeah,
hand.
you can. Yeah, hi. I'm
Hi,
like, did I do this right? Did I put my hand there?
I saw it.
So I did I raise my hand. So I'm the recorder for breakout group number 1, but I wasn't that great of a recorder because I forgot to write everybody's names down. So I apologize in advance. But we had a really great discussion. A lot of what was already mentioned. So we all talked about some of our experiences, either working with bilingual children in the classroom, working with parents, teaching in college classrooms and working with students, and how we wanted to learn a little bit more about the history about language and how it's progressed through the years in this country. We talked about our experiences either with having our children in bilingual learning programs or having our own experience of not being placed in bilingual programs as children because our parents wanted us to be English speakers and not really supporting that bilingual learning in school. They felt we had enough at home. So now I think I'm glad to hear that is shifting and parents are really seeing the value of placing their children in bilingual education programs. We talked a little bit about how it's important to share our stories with our students and empathize with their struggles as well. I work with a lot of students who are first persons in their family to attend college, who come from families that are new immigrants to this country and really have their own struggles. So I can relate to a lot of that. So just having that empathy and having those opportunities to share experiences is important. But I'm just really excited about learning more. So thank you for putting this together. I hope I did okay for our group. If anybody wants to add anything, please do.
Wow, I think there's a lot in what you've presented, and I really am struck. Excellent, Patty Yafen says. So,
oh, thanks, Yafen. I know your name, Yafen. Yafen is a colleague at Cal State Olathe.
That's great. That's great. I really love your groups calling out the importance of knowledge and the importance of families and supporting family perspectives, and also that empathy of knowing immigrant experience or of learning immigrant stories from our families and children, and in our adult classrooms, learning from our own students so that we can build that capacity, right, to understand and appreciate and ask, inquire, right? Thank you. Someone else? One more? Okay, well, let's move on. Let's move on to the next part of the presentation. Bathe your eyes on this quote. Marcel Proust has been quoted in many different ways, but Sharon found this translation that I think is particularly reflective of the complex and rich universes, or hundreds of universes, that each brings. I love the idea of other eyes, and also we can call it fresh eyes and new eyes that we want to bring, rather than becoming the tourist who wants to visit strange and exotic lands. We want to see each other with fresh, new, and other eyes to understand those universes within each of us. Pretty darn glorious. Yes, it is, Sharon. Thank you. Next slide. I'm going to pick up a couple history slides from very recent history, and then go on into what some of those themes might in in U.S. bilingual and language policy history contribute to our thinking and reflection about our own practices as faculty and professional development trainers working with ECE students and practitioners. I just want to pick up that while the English-only Proposition 227 was passed in 1998, it was in 2006 evaluated the effects of the implementation. And this quote just gives you a sense of the inability to really determine whether one instructional model was more efficacious than another for California's English language learners, and that the way the state had rolled out in different areas various instructional approaches and does not collect information at the individual student level vis-a-vis the type of instructional program made it impossible for any kind of binary consideration of an English only and other approaches to be effectively evaluated. Next slide, please. California's Proposition 58, the Multilingual Education Act, repeals the English-only language requirement of Proposition 227. And schools have flexibility now to design their own programs. And what I love is that it can suit the needs of both English language learners, as in dual language or multi-language learners, and students already proficient in English who want to learn another language, either monolingual, home language English learners, or dual language learners that would like to acquire another language. What I love too about Proposition 58 is that schools need to seek parent and community input, and that community members and parents have a voice in discussing and in making recommendations about program options that are proposed by the schools, that at least the school site is required to at least explore those sources of input from community members and parents. Next slide, please. Another very recent piece of legislation in California was Senate Bill 488, which impacts the Commission on Teacher Credentialing and reading instruction for teachers and teacher candidates, so that by July 1 of 2025, the Commission on Teacher Credentialing has to develop and implement a new literacy instruction performance assessment for teacher candidates for any credential in the state, which will replace the current RECA. By September of this year, the Commission on Teacher Credentialing had to ensure that all requirements regarding the content of teacher preparation and literacy instruction, as specified in Ed Code, are included in the standards of program quality and effectiveness. And in 2019, they convened a CTC, Commission on Teacher Credentialing, literacy work group to develop new literacy teaching performance expectations, lovingly called TPEs. And I thank Dr. Sue Sears, a colleague of mine in the Department of Special Education at CSUN, for this slide and the next slide. She served on that work group. Next slide, please. So the goal of Senate Bill 488 is high quality literacy instruction for all children, and it applies to candidates for all credentials going forward, including the new PK3 credential just recently approved in this month by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. It includes multi-tiered system of support that really looks at best first instruction, universal design of learning, and also provides targeted supplemental instruction as well as intensive intervention as needed by the students or the children of our California schools. It includes firmly principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and practices that are asset-based and culturally sustaining. I love that it includes developmental needs as well as literacy goals, and that it firmly states and explicitly states that this is to integrate and designate early language, English language learning, as well as the promotion of multiliteracy and multilingual programs. Also, this comes from parents' concerns and the roots of parents of dyslexic children, for example, and children who needed additional help in literacy development. And so I love that it has the roots in this piece of legislation from parent voices and child experiences, and that it also includes assessment for various purposes, either formative and summative for the individual program or for the individual child or student. Thank you very much, Heather, for the inclusion of that link. Next slide, please. So I just pulled out one of the new literacy performance expectations. What I love about this is there are many times in TPEs for credentials, you see identify child assets, and then you don't see anywhere how you're going to do that, right? Or what you're going to do once you identify them. Here, it clearly says incorporate asset-based pedagogies and inclusive approaches, so that we're including that as integrated content and literacy instruction to incorporate the diversity of students, children's cultures, languages, dialects, and home communities. All of those being stated out, I think, is critically important and something that we as faculty and professional development providers can advocate for at the state level, at our local campus level, at our local agency level, and also in our preparation for adult learners, our ECE practitioners. I love that it lays out that literacy is not only reading. It is reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and that these processes are intertwined in oral, written, multimodal, and visual communication. I'd say also kinesthetic communication. And we in early childhood may take those first 4 gerunds of reading to listening and turn them around in terms of sequence. Because perhaps starting with our children, we are listening and they are listening, they are speaking, we are speaking. Then we play with drawing, writing, documentation in so many ways that Reggio Emilia perspectives have sensitized us to, as well as reading in one language, in another language, and in the orientation of languages across a page, up and down a page. Next slide, please. So what I want to do now is just go over some of the themes that we've seen in Sharon's beautiful and rich overview of language policy in this country, and scanning for our own implicit biases that may be snagged or confirmed at different times in history, and also that that looking at the themes in policy can give us perhaps some particular growing points from which to build. Let's go on from here. Next slide, please. So as we've seen, clearly there has been not only kind of an accordion action of linguistic pluralism and diversity, acceptance and then rejection, but we've also seen qualitative different trends across time to our US orientation to language. And it might help us to look at these. I'm hoping it does. So next slide, please. I simplified this in a later version, and we're now looking at an earlier, so you're being barraged by words. I'm very sorry for that. What's stunning, I think, that not only California, but New Mexico both had English-only instruction laws in 1898, and that the US government, once it acquired Puerto Rico, right, in 1898, undeterred by the fact that the entire population of Puerto Rico was Spanish-speaking, banned Spanish and made English the official language. What we have seen in this is an anti-bilingual policy and a creation of what we see in that quote from the US Supreme Court, to allow the children of foreigners to be taught in the language of the country of their parents was to naturally inculcate in them the ideas and sentiments foreign to the best interest of this country. I want you to really emphasize the ideas and sentiments foreign to the best interest of this country, which certainly is making an assumption that those languages and cultures and sentiments that other families are bringing from afar are dangerous to the interest of the US. This idea of foreign, and that foreign means that English only should be prioritized, is a theme that we have seen come and go throughout our history. By the 1970s, you can see later, 34 states had English only requirements in their schools. And as Sharon told us, Reagan described other languages that supplant English as if it were an either or. When we know in the newest research that becoming competent and proficient in your home language not only assists you in becoming competent in English, but overall strengthens cognitive development for the dual or multi-language speaker. So what occurred to me in here was a question of, in what ways are we inclusive of our adult learners languages and cultures in the adult learning classroom? And in what ways are we supporting our ECE practitioner teachers who are students or participants in professional development in the early childhood classroom to do that for acknowledging the strengths and assets of children's languages and cultures? Next slide, please. The goals of assimilation are clear throughout the history of U.S. bilingual and language policy. And when I see that assimilation is the goal, I don't see both the Te Waraiki goals of belongingness nor of contribution acknowledged. This quote from a mother in Montreal who was an immigrant from South America, recognizing how difficult it is for teachers to learn about diverse cultures, but they should make the effort, she says, because unfortunately there are stereotypes that should be addressed, broken down, and the ahas of learning what is instead of what we think is are the places of inspiration for building relationships and the foundation upon which children feel both that they have contributions and they belong. So in what ways do we prepare ECE teachers to support children's unique assets in this way, and also in full panoply of activities and focuses and ways of moving, singing, rhyming, listening, speaking, documenting, sharing, and so much more? Next. Also, in establishing intentional child-family school partnerships to support and become familiar with child and individual strengths. I am struck by this quote from a Korean mother in Los Angeles. This Korean child had been born here. She had learned English and Korean. In her children's center, she was surrounded by children who were also Korean and Korean American. So when she first went to public kindergarten, she felt nervous. What I think is striking is that this mother only had the opportunity to share with Esther's teacher after a month of Esther being in that kindergarten, remaining silent in that kindergarten. So in what ways do we prepare our adult students and participants in professional development to engage with families, to learn from them and with them about their child's strengths, development, and learning? Next slide, please. So again, this slide was simplified. I'm bathing you again in words. So the 1970s on gave us in our history, thankfully, a very strong emphasis with the civil rights movement and civil rights protections in language learning, also in special education and answering special needs for sorry, I'm just going on, special needs and with IFSPs and IEPs, and the role of families and the right of families in that IFSP, IEP process that really helps us and taking action to, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. To take action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation for all students, whether they be English language learners and dual language learners or multi-language learners or English only speakers who want to learn another language. So in what ways do we prepare our adult students and participants to support children's rights wherever possible? Reggio Emilia, again, has been an inspiration to us to know about the 100 languages of children and children's rights. We have looked at the United Nations on the Children's Rights Declaration and seen the leadership of Norway and of Chile in making that policy national policy as well. Next step. So you get a chance to talk again. So we would like to ask you to meet again in breakout groups, and this time answer what resonates with you about language and literacy policy and what that means for you as a faculty member or as a professional development provider in working with our early childhood practitioners and students. So could you please, again, you'll be randomly assigned, and please assign a recorder and look on the Google Doc to your breakout room number, and please document and be ready to report on, but document so we have the record of it both orally and written in the Google Doc. Thank you very much and have great conversations. Welcome back. I think we're starting to be populated back as one workshop room. Not yet. As it develops.
I was going to say, I don't see anybody, Jan.
I don't either.
No, we're still a group of 6.
Yes.
Rooms were closed, so
There we
here
go.
they come.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. We're really, really happy to that you had time to really reflect on this prompt and think and share together. Because of our time, we would like to take no more than 5 minutes total, but we would like to ask if groups could please report what 1 or 2 of your takeaways were from breakout experience B. Which group would like to present? Which recorder? Hey, Carol.
I wasn't the recorder. Kathy was so busy recording, did such a fine job. But we decided that the assets are something that we address throughout our curriculum, and that's just how you teach children. But funds of knowledge, that's a new terminology we need to get used to, but we need to really be aware of funds of knowledge coming from the parents, from the child, and from us. What do we bring? So we're modeling to our students how to bring out and honor the funds of knowledge and the assets that are brought to the class. And then we got into a whole discussion about biases and how we all bring biases, all cultures do, no matter what we are. But that was basically our discussion.
Thank you very much. That term funds of knowledge is an incredible contribution to this work. Thank you. Next group, I'm trying to.
Is it like Nanu Clark has her hand up.
Nanu?
Double A's?
Yeah, hi. In our group, well, the group started with one of the members of the group, Vega, sharing how excited she was about a new immersion program in San Luis Obispo because it was such a new thing. I live in the Bay Area, and immersion, I was completely shocked because here in the Bay Area, two-way immersion programs are really common and have been for 25, 30 years. Every district has one or two Spanish immersion programs, and there are several Cantonese and Mandarin these are all public schools. So we talked for a while about the difference in each place that people lived. My mind was blown by the fact that this is not common outside of the Bay Area. And then we started talking about bilingual education in general and how to support children in keeping their home, or, just the importance of supporting children keeping their home languages and becoming proficient and literate in English as well.
Thank you very, very much, Nanu. I think that regional difference is an important takeaway for us. And also that under Prop 227, I think parents had to explicitly waiver in their child to bilingual options, which was an extra barrier or challenge for those programs to thrive and the children to have that experience. That's good. Thank you. Jonine?
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to share. So we had Heather Kennedy, Michelle St. Germain, and Latanya Hardy. And some of the things that we talked about were, the powerful ways that we can use strategies and stories in our classrooms and with parents, that when we use real stories, that just as Jan, as you were sharing the stories, that we would lean in to listen more and more carefully. And so just being able to use stories with children and with parents and have them lean in real stories and then empower them to tell their stories. Being selective in the literature that we choose to share with children, because they do have they communicate, both verbally and non-verbally. And if there is bias or there are things that are represented that don't represent all of the cultures for our children, then, it's time to have discussions about that and be thoughtful about what we're choosing. And then also just when we're working with children that are bilingual, that it's not just the child's home language that it's not just bringing somebody in that speaks that. If we don't, it's what we embed within our programs and our teaching. How do we use gestures throughout? How do we color code different languages? How do we make sure that we're not one-stop shop or visiting this at one point, that we are embedding it within our teaching practices so that we are collectively, bringing everyone together to learn and grow together.
Thank you so much. I love your groups leaning in. Last one, Ya Zhuang Sheng. I'm sorry if I said your name.
Yes. Hi, everyone. And I was in a group with Liliana Hernandez and Kristen Sherman. I feel like we want to also share a little bit about what we talked about in the breakout room. We kind of touch on a lot of things people have already said here as practical ways that we want to value that asset base of learning and also value children's home culture. Something that we focused on is we want to kind of think forward. What are some resources that actually is available to classroom teachers, to faculty members, to really understand that the bilingual, multilingual differences? If we want to using children's narratives, labeling our classrooms, inviting families. Those are great things to do. But then what are kind of a training and support that we can get translators when we don't know the language that the children speak at home? And also we found it's almost impossible for us to be inclusive for all the languages that might be possibly speaking in our career, the children's families from our career. So having that support and the training, it will be very, very beneficial. And also a question we ask is about coming back, what is our learning goal set up for those students? Is the learning goal just to help them learn English, and or also the home language is also part of the learning goal that we should embed it in our education system? So those are the two things we touched on.
Thank you so very much. Well, clearly you've contributed a lot as a group, and I wish we could go on, but we have to be mindful of time. Thank you very, very much. Martine?
Yes, thank you so much, Jan and Sharon, for sharing all of this information and ideas and concepts for us all to reflect later. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and for your participation, especially in breakout rooms. I'd really like to share an explanation of what is happening with our evaluation of this project. The work that we are doing together, you and those of us at Peach, is funded by the Dr. Seuss Foundation, and as you can appreciate, we must submit evaluations and reports of our work. So yesterday you will have received, as participants, an evaluation survey. That was an overall evaluation, pre-evaluation, for those planning to take part in one or more of our workshops. We hope you'll stay the course with us and stay for all 6 workshops through to April. What happened today is that you received a link earlier on this morning for prompts to help us see where you are at, to help us guide our work in supporting you. What you'll see now in the chat is another prompt. This is for a reflection. It does go to us and to Peach only as an evaluation of today's workshop only, but in the form of a reflection. And we welcome any of your comments about the work we did with you today and your thoughts moving forward. I'd like to particularly mention just 2 more points before we leave. It's now 11:59 California time. So in the final minute, I'd like to share 2 points. Number 1, we really look forward to seeing you, if you're able, to join us on Friday, November 18th. I feel like a TV show. Same time, same place, on Zoom, 10 a.m. until 12 noon. We'll be looking at language acquisition and development. And your 2 co-presenters today, Jan and Sharon, will be joined by one of our other Peach colleagues, Regina. So we look forward to seeing you there. It certainly is my place to say a huge message of gratitude to all those who helped make this possible today, certainly to Sharon and Jan, and behind the scenes, Nancy Hurlbert and Barbara Rosner, and our technology support team, who will be making sure that these slides get uploaded for you to review later. But I'd like to make a special point of thanking Dr. Sandy Kewanapta Dixon, who gave us the land acknowledgement message to open this meeting. And I would like to close in just a couple of the languages that I know as an immigrant to the United States. So thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye, everyone. Au revoir. Guten Tag zusammen. And for those who might be celebrating otherwise, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, everyone.